Welcome to the Connected Campus podcast, where we explore the ways that diverse professionals are working every day to optimize their efforts to recruit, retain, and graduate their students.
Greetings, everyone. Dustin here with a quick intro for this episode number 6 of rebroadcast interview with Bret Ingerman. Great conversation, still very timely and relevant. So we'll be interspersing these rebroadcast episodes over the next couple of months. So we did our first one a couple of weeks ago. So definitely look forward to more of these. And then every other week, a rebroadcast on the off week, it'll be a new interview that I'll be doing with a different guest. So new episode with me next week. Keep an eye out for that. And thank you so much for listening to this episode with Bret Ingerman.
We are really excited to be joined today during this podcast by Bret Ingerman, who works for Tallahassee Community College. And we're going to talk to him a little bit about his experiences there in technology and education, about connection and what that looks like. So let's jump into it. So I have known you now a little more than a year, and I was quite taken the first time I met you, and even in a couple of other professional experiences that we've had. Your title is very explicitly different than some other titles in IT that I've heard before. Can you tell us what your actual title is and then why the distinction?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story. So thank you for asking that. So my title is Vice President for Information Technology. And the word you're talking about is the word for, since a lot of folks would have their title being vice president of. And that's always been a pet peeve of mine. The sense is you are president or vice president of an organization, right? So if I was vice president of information technology, that sort of implies that there's a president of information technology, and that's not true. I think that when you become a senior administrator at a college or university, no matter what area you represent, you're a vice president of the institution for a particular area. So you bring a particular expertise to the table. So it's not like I only do IT and I'm the vice president of IT. I'm the vice president of Tallahassee Community College, where my area of expertise is information technology. So it's a small word, but I think it connotes something more important about what leadership should be about. Since people ask about seats at the table, in higher education, that comes up quite a bit. And I think there's a sense that people think when they sit at the table, they sit at the table in the IT chair. And that's actually not true. You sit at the table as a colleague running an institution where you just happen to know IT, but you're free to weigh in on any topic that's confronting the executive leadership, like pandemic planning, right? And others feel free to weigh in on IT issues. So it's just the expertise you bring to the table.
That little preposition says a lot, huh?
To me, it does. I don't know that others see it that way, but it just means, I've spent 33 years in higher education, and I've been involved in all the conversations about when IT no one would even have thought necessarily to have a report to the president. And I've watched all the changes, and I've been to sessions where people bemoan, why aren't they there? And it becomes clear in a hurry that some people shouldn't be there. Some people think that, their seat at the table is to be strong about IT. Well, sometimes it's being strong about another part of the institution and recognizing priorities. For COVID, while technology was a real important purchase and an important need to have us pivot, the safety of our students and faculty was far more important. So no matter what my technology needs were at the moment, they paled in comparison to making sure our students and faculty were safe. And I think you need to have that institutional perspective, knowing that you can draw on a deep well of IT specific knowledge. But when you do this for a while, I've got knowledge of finance and student affairs and others, you start to learn more, and ideally you help others at the table learn more about what you can bring to bear. So
I think our audience is understanding why we wanted to interview you. You've got such a wealth of experience, and you said 33 years. Tell us about your history. How long have you been doing IT? What's that look like? How long have you been with Tallahassee?
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
So I'm not an IT person by training. I'm a psychologist by training. Back then it was called experimental psychology because neuroscience wasn't a thing yet. But I studied stress-induced high blood pressure, which is kind of interesting now, right? When you sort of go full circle being an IT leader. Fell into this by accident, needing money one summer, and Syracuse University at the time, where I was a grad student, was starting a new IT shop for faculty computing. And I fell in love with working with faculty on how to use technology to teach. That's actually my background in the field. I've been at big schools and small schools. I've been at West Coast and East Coast, spent some time in Oregon, spent some time at other schools in New York. Before, I've been at Tallahassee Community College for 8 years. Before that, I spent 8 years at Vassar College, where I was a vice president of information technology. So going from one of the wealthiest schools in the United States to one of the poorest. By comparison, we do the same things at TCC that other schools do, but we do it only earning $90 per credit hour. In the 8 years I've been here, we have not had a tuition increase at all. So I've been an executive in in IT leadership for well over more than half my career. But my background is specifically in instructional technology and academic computing, before it was called that. And I've just loved watching how the field has blossomed. And most recently, it's been interesting to watch how IT has taken on there's been a renewed interest in IT as we form the backbone for all the pivots that most schools have gone through to be able to, successfully work in this COVID environment.
I do want to talk about COVID. I'm not going to ignore that. But before we do that, I have to ask the question that we essentially ask all of our guests. This is the podcast about the connected campus. And connection, by our definition, is pretty broad. And that's on purpose, because there's so many different ways that you can connect. But without predisposing you, I'd love to hear, when I talk about the connected campus or connected students or a connected institution, what does that mean to you? And how does that really start to come out in what you do, how you talk, how you strategize, how you implement? What does connection mean in your eyes?
It would be trite and too simplistic to say that the connected student is a student who has devices that connect to things. I think we're well beyond that. I think, to me, when I hear connected, I think in my head I hear engaged. That I hear that when you talk about a connected student or a connected campus, what I keep thinking about are students being connected to the institution, connected to their education, connected to each other. I think from technology, I think of systems connected to each other and using that information to reach out and connect with students. So to me, it's about the relationships, if you will, the interrelationships between and among the people at our institution, the systems at our institution, the data at our institution. That's, whenever I've heard you refer to or ask about the connected campus, that's the first thing that occurs, is how are we connecting people to people, people to systems, systems to systems, data to each other? How are we making all those connections between and amongst the people and the systems we're responsible for? That make sense?
Absolutely. When I bring this up with folks, I often hear them go back to their college experience. I'm curious, do you have a college memory that made you feel connected or disconnected?
Probably more disconnected. I think I went to school in the age of large universities and feeling like you're just a number. Certainly it was more physically connected because technology wasn't present. I mean, I remember registering with punch cards, sitting in a gymnasium and going around and connecting the cards, grabbing all the cards for the classes that you wanted. I was connected to certain people there, but at a large university back in the 80s, you sort of felt like a number. It was hard to really be connected, except with your small cohort of friends, social life, fraternity, whatever it was you were a part of, and key faculty. But even there, key faculty didn't start to materialize in your life typically until you were upper class student, because the lower levels, I mean, you're in a biology class with 500 students in a lecture. So it was hard to feel connected. And there was no learning management system that would help mitigate that, mitigate the numbers. You had teaching assistants who, even there, you were in a large recitation section on, as a part of an even larger lecture. So I think what I've learned through my education, and I came from a small prep school prior to that where connections were really tight. I think what I've learned is that no matter how big you are, no matter how many students you're dealing with, and at TCC, we're dealing with tens of thousands of students, you're not too big to try to find ways to connect students to each other, connect students to the campus, connect students to the data, connect decision-making to the data. So connected can apply in lots of different ways. I mean, it wasn't a bad experience. I don't think I'd go back and redo any part of my experience, but it did show me that there are better ways to engage with people, and that technology offers, in some ways, the ability to do that, to reach out in ways we couldn't before.
I feel very similarly. I had that same kind of experience, and it's really spurred me on to try to do some things to make some change. So I love hearing that. Okay, so speaking of disconnected, we are talking here in October of 2020, and what a year 2020 has proved to be. We have to talk a little bit about COVID, at least a little bit. And again,
Sure.
I don't want to go too far down this road. We don't have to, but how has the disruption that COVID has brought, not just to our world, but to higher education specifically, how has that impacted you guys at Tallahassee? How have you worked to overcome it? What have you seen as some of the problem areas that have resulted from it? And what are you trying to do strategically as you look to the future?
Boy, it's a lot to cover. I would say that COVID in and of itself obviously was traumatic and transitional for all of us. But I think that there were institutions like TCC that were better able to pivot and transition due to some larger strategic decision making that we had had up until that point. So like other schools, we on the 13th of March realized that this wasn't going away and that this was a pretty big deal. That weekend, the executive team was in contact regularly, and we decided on the Monday that we were basically going to move everybody to remote work and remote teaching. Our spring break was that week. This was actually the week of, I guess, the 9th or the 16th. We had spring break that week. And so we were charged with figuring out how do we go ahead and get everything to happen remotely in a span of 7 days. And we were able to do that. We came back up 7 days later with every employee working remotely and every student taking online classes remotely. And we were largely able to do that, as I said, because of strategic decisions. So we had moved more and more of our services to the cloud. When I got hired, we became one of the first things I did was cloud first, if we could. Our ERP Workday is in the cloud. We made that decision in 2012 and 13 when many schools thought that they were risk averse to doing that. Our learning management system was in the cloud. We had moved our login and authentication to the cloud partly because our infrastructure was aging, and it was easier to come up with operating expenses than capital expenses. But more importantly, we had the experience of having to evacuate the college multiple times in the 8 years here due to threats of hurricanes. And you start to realize that when the power goes out at the college, the systems that are at the college now suffer. So the goal was to move more and more things online. So we already had a lot of our critical systems online that we weren't worried about a power outage. And we had moved I don't think I've ever talked to you about this. We had taken our telephone system, this necessary evil, and we had moved to a cloud-based provider for our Avaya phone system. It's actually hosted by a company in Tallahassee. Because, I mean, look, the idea of cloud is simple. You know, people think cloud is worrisome, but unless the servers are actually in your office, everything you do is in the cloud. So it's this romantic notion to think that it was on campus. But, you know, if you're sitting in your office and you're a faculty member and the learning management system server isn't in your office, what do you actually care where it is? As long as it's on the internet and you can access it, it doesn't matter. Same for a voice over IP phone system. The hardware doesn't have to be on campus. It just has to be somewhere that's fault tolerant. So we were able to move everybody home, have them move to soft phones, have our call centers move, have everybody move, and through other strategic purchases of systems that are connected and integrate with each other, we were able to keep a sense of community and engagement. So, you know, for the purpose of the podcast, we were an early adopter, which we call MyTCC. That gave us a portal so that we had a way where students could virtually engage with each other, where students could virtually engage with questions with offices on campus. I mean, we were fortunate that we had stood it up the fall before to get people interested. And we went from, I mean, we were seeing good growth and good use, but now we have 13,000 people regularly using campus, MyTCC portal, without much advertising, without much of anything, because they know it's a place where they can go and engage with other students and help each other out. So those purchases, systems that were resilient, that were cloud-based, enabled us to pivot pretty quickly. I would say one last thing about that. As we all look to a time where we're post COVID, and hopefully that will be sometime soon or from the spring. We don't anticipate that we're going to go back to everything. We're finding, for example, that some of the technologies we put in place and some of the services we put in place are really going to make a difference in a lasting way. One example, so we've always had online classes. We've always had self-paced traditional online classes, but our support services were typically 8:30 to 5. So if you were an online student and you were taking your class at 6 o'clock at night and you had a question, who did you talk to? IT was closed, others were closed. By moving some of our support into campus, into my TCC, we now have a forum where students can ask questions after hours and students can help each other before we actually get to them sometimes to answer the questions. Zoom, the ability to move quickly between meetings, or Microsoft Teams. I mean, we were traditional. If there was a meeting, we'd get up, we'd walk across campus, great to see people and sit down. But if that's a 20-minute meeting, there's a lot of wasted time moving back and forth. Whereas a phone call is a disembodied voice. The idea now that we're all comfortable doing two-way video conferencing, even if it's quick, gives me a sense of I get to see you nodding your head, right? So I know that it resonates, as opposed to just wondering, did that last comment resonate with Jeff? COVID's taught us a lot, I think, about some of the technologies that we'll find valuable post-COVID as we find where they fit into our new lives.
Wow, I'm very curious to know if that translates out to educators as well, right? To the professors. I know that some have really gone kicking and screaming, whereas others have leaned into some of the differences. So it's nice to know that the infrastructure is there, and that you're saying we're probably going to continue doing some of this because it's been so effective. I'm truly curious to know if the faculty will follow suit.
The biggest pressure we had for the kinds of classes that students wanted were for synchronous online classes. So they wanted a sense of, I think, accountability, a sense of place and time to show up for class, have a faculty member show up for class, and not just be left to their own devices to see when am I going to fit in that class that I've got to do, that assignment I have to do in the LMS tonight. I think that's here to stay. I think for a lot of our students, being at a public 2-year, getting out of the house can be problematic for some of our students. They may not have childcare. They may not have transportation, ready transportation when they need it. So the idea that they'd be able to be at home or be someplace and actually attend a class virtually but live is pretty compelling. I think we'll see more of that continue. I think we'll see some of the technologies enhanced. Like Zoom is a great tool for doing video conferencing, but it's not a great tool for doing video instruction. It doesn't have a lot of the academic kinds of things wrapped around it. But we're starting to now see companies release products that integrate tightly with Zoom. My TCC integrates with Zoom, but we're seeing companies wrap around the APIs at Zoom to offer some more instructional features, attendance, that kind of thing happening there. So I think we're going to see that market emerge. I mean, the technology lags a bit behind the use case, but I think we're going to start to see more and more of that happen. So I think faculty will adopt some of these solutions. Kicking and screaming, I don't know. I know that we've had a number of faculty too who are immunosuppressed, who welcome the idea of continuing teaching, albeit teaching from afar to their students. So I think we all look, we're humans. We crave interpersonal interactions. I think that's going to be the standard. But I think now we've learned that there's a place for other modalities and other ways of teaching that sort of resonate. And we'll find a happy middle. We'll find a place where those really help.
Yeah, I look at it as a continuum, right? There's the evangelists, and I use E in the small e, right? On one end of the continuum. On the other end of the continuum, you've got the cave people, right? Colleagues against virtually everything. And so somewhere in the middle, I'm just wondering where on that continuum it lies.
I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think the bigger schools that have to worry about this are the traditional 4-year liberal arts, where you're selling you're not just selling education, you're selling a lifestyle experience. Yeah. I think there's where some of the challenges are being faced now in higher education. What does it look like when you can't have that experience? And is it worth the price for that education when you don't get that experience, versus a community college where you can get the education? You get an experience too. It's not the residential 4-year experience, but you do get the experience. And we're looking to do, as I said earlier, to try to replicate as much of that engagement, that connectedness, if you will, in this time where we're not physically connected as much as we'd like to be.
So speaking of the community college experience, I started working with the Iowa Community College Online Consortium back in 2002. And it very quickly became apparent to me, community colleges are where much, if not more, innovation takes place in higher ed. than most other sectors, largely because they're forced to. And I think our audience is now hearing from you as you talk about your suite of products, your portfolio of products that you have to manage and think about strategically. I was excited to bring you to the conversation that we have at campus with regard to the campus advisory group. So you are sometimes referred to, I think, as the godfather of that group, because you have so much knowledge and so much wisdom when it comes to what you're talking about. We were super excited to have you join us there. But as you talk about recommendations you make to us about functionality, marketing, everything, I know that you've got this large pool of things that you're dealing with on your side. You've got all of these products, you've got all these people. I'm curious, how do you approach that strategy? How do you approach the innovation that a community college so desperately needs? Because you often don't have the funds that these 4-year private schools might have, or even some of the big public schools might have. How do you approach that when you start thinking about that portfolio of products?
I think that's a good question. I think the strategy could apply to even wealthier schools. We find ourselves in a position of not being able to have the luxury of unitaskers. It's like, in the kitchen, buying that gadget that you're going to use for one thing that you maybe use once every 6 or 7 months. We don't have that luxury, right? So what we try to do is to try to find products that meet needs, but that offer us a rich set of ways to integrate those products with other products. So lots of ERP systems on the market. Many of them, though, work like closed filing cabinets. Your data goes in, and then once a night, you can suck the data out to a data warehouse, and then you can do stuff with the data warehouse. Well, that's old data. It's not in the moment. We consciously looked for a solution that offered a robust set of APIs, so application programming interface, so that in the moment, we could connect something that happens in Workday to something outside. So a student registers for a class, we can immediately register them for that class in Canvas, right? In real time, not worrying about doing it the night before. With Campus, with the portal, what attracted us to you guys was a product that not only showed some vision. We've looked at lots of portals in the past, and there are some very proprietary ones, and there are ones like SharePoint, which we used to use, that really don't lend them, they're just overly technically complicated to get done the kinds of things you want to do. And I will tell you that what really sold us on it was the idea that not only was the product emerging to meet needs, but the product was open, and we had lots of ability to programmatically interact with the product in ways that offered us new functionality and new features. So one of the next things teed up is you guys originally had ways of messaging and notifying within the product, within sending a notification to your phone. Well, we're interested in text messaging students because that's where we live. So we have a text messaging platform that has open APIs. And so we're going to look to connect those two together so that we can have things that happen in campus, maybe trigger a text message out to a student to be able to do some clever things. To get back to your original question, for me, it's finding these tools that offer us the ability to connect so that I feel like I go into conversations with my colleagues on the executive team around campus, listening to their needs and going, we may not have a product that exactly meets those needs, but I've got these 3 components that I can put together, and I can offer you a service that is bigger than any of those 1 components, and that may be a bit more tailored than buying that one off-the-shelf application that would cost a lot of money for that specific task.
Alton Brown talks about that all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
The professor of chefs.
Yeah, not wanting a unitasker.
Yeah, the only one in the kitchen should be your fire extinguisher. Everything else should be double duty, right? Yeah.
And it's fun. What's interesting there is, to me, that's what keeps IT fun these days. It's trying to figure out, how can I meet the needs of a particular office without having the funds necessarily of a large institution? But even large institutions, look at COVID, they're now feeling the crunch as well for this. So, by having all of these tools that I can readily interconnect with APIs and a really talented team of IT colleagues, we're able to put things together in really clever ways. So much so that the president has asked us, and we're working on a project to document all of the applications we have and all the ways that we're connecting those applications together. And indeed, the icon we're using there is their gears that are turning with the logos of the applications embedded in the gears, so that people on campus who might want to see, well, what do we have to do text messaging? Or what do we have that can send out email messages to students? Or what do we have that could do X, Y, or Z? They can go to these tech cards, we're calling them, take a look at them, see who's using them, and then reach out and see all the components that we've got that we can put together and create solutions for them.
I really love the way that you're approaching this. But speaking of the approach, we've got to talk about when I first came on, we were lucky enough to just start the conversation with you all. And you put us through the ringer, the Shark Tank, I think you call it.
Mm-hmm.
I would love for you to explain to folks how you approach getting new people into your portfolio and what that looks like from a commercial experience and a commercial relationship. I know it doesn't happen this way for every partner that you work with, but how do you do that? And why do you take this approach?
So the beautiful thing about the internet, right, is that I can go out and find vendors who have solutions to the needs that I have. The terrible thing about what happens these days is the number of unsolicited requests from vendors, cold calls, skyrockets. I get literally hundreds a day. One just came through. You may have heard the ding in the background. Their phone calls, their email messages, their unsolicited calendar invitations that pop up. And it got to be pretty annoying, and I punt them all. I don't respond to any of them, absolutely none of them, unless, of course, they're a local vendor where I think there's a relationship reason to have a conversation. All right. So I have an administrative assistant who's executive assistant, who's absolutely outstanding, salt of the earth. She's wonderful, and I've taught her to be horribly obnoxious to the vendors and basically punt them all as well. But it occurred to me that some of these vendors may actually have something that might be of interest to us. And so I created a form online. And the idea is if a vendor wants to talk to me, they need to go out and fill out the form. It's on our website. They can go look. They can see our strategic plan, the kinds of things we're thinking about in a big picture. We'll never get to all of them, but it's got a lot of coverage. And the vendor can fill out a form. And then a couple times a month, I actually have one coming up Thursday of this week, a day, I will do meetings with all those vendors for 20 minutes each. And the idea is, it's not like I have a need looking for a solution. I will go out and find those people. But the conversation typically starts out with the vendor is, you have a solution in search of a need. Tell me why it is you think I should be interested in your product. And in some cases, you find out that the sales team for many vendors have been misleading the folks who follow up on these calls, that they were led to believe I've got, here's a hot prospect, and I'm not a prospect at all yet. But for the companies that really take it seriously, and I would say Campus did, you find out that they took the time to look at the website. They took the time to have, you guys took the time to have a conversation. And in 20 minutes, it was like, you know what? I really do have something that I need to go ahead and have a relationship. I'm looking for a portal that I could use with our students to be able to engage them in really interesting ways. And you have a solution that fits that need. And further, you were interested in finding a partner. And so that led to some follow-up conversations where we decided to do business together. But I'd say about 20% of the calls that I have of those Shark Tank episodes lead to some sort of follow-up conversation. We don't procure all of them, but that's okay. We don't need to. It's just nice to know they're out there. So if I get a need down the road, I know that there's a vendor that I've done business with, and you quickly find the ones that really don't have any interest in you. They're just checking a box and meeting a quota for how many calls did they make. And those end really quickly. Company that calls me that's doing a show and tell for a product we've already procured, that they could tell if they just looked at our board portal for the product we already procured. Those are really short. It's like, well, did you do your homework? Did you know that we're not in the market for this anymore? Yeah. Anyway, it's just a way of giving vendors an opportunity to talk to me, the vice president, the final decision maker, provided in a way that's structured so that I know that those vendors are serious about wanting to have a conversation.
Wow, Bret, yet again, I feel like that's a testament to leadership. And, I have talked in my career with my chief innovation hat on. I love those sorts of experiences, but I talked to plenty of other innovation officers and IT leaders who refused all calls, and they were very proud of that. And I often wondered, how do you find the new stuff? How do you even know that it's out there?
I typically find, it's interesting, the vendors who typically are willing to go do this are the smaller vendors, the startups, the ones who really are interesting. And when you go to a large conference, you go to a large exhibit hall with vendors, and all the big vendors have the huge booths in the center, and the thing is, you can talk to those guys anywhere. Where I gravitate towards are the less expensive tables at the sides of the exhibit hall, where the emerging vendors are, the ones who have a really cool idea and looking to see, can they get some traction for it? That's where I start to find not only the vendors, but sometimes not only the products, but sometimes it's the entrepreneur themselves. It's the head of the company who's thinking of things in a completely different way. And I may not be interested there, but you know what? 8 months or a year, they've got another product. It's like, oh, wait a second. I remember talking to that person about this, and I like their way of thinking. So this is a way of me finding the small vendors out there who have a solution in search of a need, and they're basically pinging me to see, do you have a need for our solution? And sometimes it just happens to work out.
So Bret, that leadership propensity that you obviously have, you ooze it. It comes out of you. I'm positive that the leadership at your institution feels the same way. You said earlier, you sit at that table with executive leadership. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, how do you approach those conversations with other senior leaders? How do you, what values do you bring to that? What beliefs do you bring to that table? And then how do you let that inform what you do, how you talk? How do you have those conversations?
You go to them all with someone in my position. You go to them all knowing that technology is a means to an end. It's not the end in and of itself. And when you sit at the executive table, what you realize is sometimes the most important thing the institution is facing is not a technology related issue. You could be at a residential college and you're worrying about how do you keep the dorms safe during a pandemic, or how do you replace roofs when you don't have as much capital expenditure funds that you can make. And so it gives you a larger perspective. And I think when I sit at the table, what I'm doing is I'm listening to people talk in their language about their needs. And I'm acting as a translator to see, is there anything I can bring to bear to help them with that need? I'm fond of saying that I have no fear that my executive team colleagues will find me when they have a technology need, right? What I think the real value of being at the table with them regularly is they may not be aware that technology can actually help solve a problem that they may be having, that they just didn't know. I didn't know the technology existed to do that, or I didn't know we had systems that could do that. Take as an example, during the pandemic, our advisors were struggling. We had software that we used to do queuing of students for appointments to go see an advisor. So they didn't have to wait in a room. They could join a virtual queue. The app would tell them, where are they in place? Hey, Jeff, you got 15 minutes, make your way up to advising. If you're running late on the app, you could say, hey, look, I need another 20 minutes. And it would let people behind you jump the line, all real well and good. Well, the ability of having that meant when we pivoted online, we could create virtual queues. But the problem was the advisors were having trouble getting the students to respond, and they were sending text messages to the students, and they were concerned about so many students having their private cell phone number. So they reached out to us and said, is there anything we could do? It's like, well, yeah, we actually have a texting platform, and we can start to connect these things together to make it easier for you. They didn't know that was possible. They didn't know we necessarily had a solution that could make their lives easier, but we did, right? So I think being at the executive table means listening actively to the kinds of challenges they're facing, and then going back and figuring out, do I have anything in my arsenal that can help achieve that goal, overcome that obstacle, move that initiative forward in ways that they may not have thought about. And it also gives me an opportunity to make them more aware of the infrastructure needs that we need to be able to make that happen. I mean, think of it this way. If you're at home, when you go flip the switch on the wall to turn the light on, you don't ever stop to think, is the light going to come on, right? You assume it's going to come on. Well, a lot of money goes into making sure that assumption is real, right? The city, the power utility invests a lot to make sure that happens. Well, we need to invest a lot to make sure when someone sits down at their computer, at their smartphone, at wherever they happen to be, that the resources, the technology they're expecting is there. So it's not that I think we're the most important thing there, but there are necessary infrastructure expenditures, and part of my job there is to bring those needs forward as well, so that the executives, my colleagues, know that there's a cost for all of this. And we do our best to minimize that cost, but there's a cost nonetheless. So it's a matter of sharing what we need to share and saying, you know what, while I needed to upgrade this server, I fully understand the need to do this over in the student union is far more important. So it's making the horse trades with the others on the executive team, and it's bringing solutions to their challenges and their problems. We are a service organization. We are different than other parts of the institution. We are there to meet their needs, be they academic, be they administrative, whatever they are. And sitting at the table lets me hear those needs firsthand and start to figure out, how do I structure our expenditures, our services, and our staffing to meet the needs of where the college is going.
It's interesting to me as I've now been able to explore this a little bit with you. Your approach to the portfolio of products you have, I would label as interdependence. You're looking for those products that can talk to one another and work with one another and have some overlap. But it sounds like your approach to people is the same thing, to create that interdependence, that ecosystem where one part of the business relies on another part of the business and you all work together in order to accomplish things. I think that's fantastic.
Well, thanks. I mean, we don't want people coming to us trying to tell us what technology is out there to solve their particular needs. I'd rather have them describe their challenge and their problem and let us find the solution. So I don't view my job as to tell people what technologies they can't buy. And with everything being in the cloud, departments can go off and buy their own thing. If they don't need our help, they can go buy whatever they want. When I know we're making a difference is when departments and other VPs come to us and say, hey, look, we're looking for a product to do X. Will you sit with us in the demos to do this? And my answer is always, absolutely. We want you, functional folks, to decide what product or solution meets your needs, right? If though there are choices that you could live with, let us start to figure out which is the tool that gives us the best opportunity to leverage that down the road in ways you might not even be thinking it right now. So yeah, it's not trying to create silos. It's purposely trying to cut horizontally across and say, we know what we know best, you know your needs best. Let's partner together to figure out how we can meet those needs for you and with you.
So I think that tees up the last question I'd like to ask you. Right now, we're in this time when higher ed is in a strange spot, I think. There's a lot of critics out there talking about the problems of higher ed, from media to politicians. Some people are saying it needs to shrink. Other people are saying, no, it needs to grow exponentially. It should, be free for all, and all these sorts of things. If we were to give you the proverbial magic wand and ask you to apply it to higher ed, what would you like to see happen?
The biggest thing I'd like to see done is to make an education available to as many people as possible without the financial barriers, without the transportation barriers, without the logistical barriers that are there, that can exist. And I think we need to offer a continuum, if you will, of educational opportunities. I mean, one of the things I've loved about being at a public 2-year after spending my entire career at private 4 years is we meet a variety of needs. I mean, I've talked to students. I remember my first year here, I was at graduation and I was talking to a woman in line to get her diploma who was a felon, convicted felon. She got out of jail and wanted to become a better person for her family, right? She wanted to have job opportunities. Were it not for us, she wouldn't have had that opportunity. She's not a 4-year residential student. She couldn't afford it. That wouldn't fit her life. But the fact that we were there offering an associate's degree to her, the fact that we're there offering a certificate in a particular field, be it welding, be it cybersecurity, that can help you advance in your career, and the fact that we're a stepping stone to a 4-year school, are all there. I think the magic wand would be to make it affordable without making someone be indebted for the rest of their life to do this. I think what we all need are the ability to have the skills we need to meet current needs, but then know that institutions are there to help us retool, reskill when something comes up and there's a need to pivot. I think having education be accessible for all is really what I would use the magic wand for. Giving people a lifelong ability to learn is one thing. Giving them a lifelong opportunity to learn is something else. And we tend to find ourselves talking about lifelong learning is important. Well, great. That's awesome, provided you have a place where you can go and learn for the rest of your life. And so having those opportunities available, I think, are where I'd use the magic wand. Recognizing that not everything is for everybody, not everything can be affordable to everybody, but we certainly can make educational opportunities available to everybody to give them that first step, give them that next step on their lifelong career to being productive members of society in their chosen fields.
Thank you, Bret. Thanks not only for your time today, for talking to us, but really thank you for putting the student at the heart of every answer that I think you gave. The student was in there and really at the center. So I know you have a heart for students. It's obvious with how you talk. It's obvious with the institution that you work with. I would encourage anyone who's listening to this, go check out Tallahassee Community College's website. It's pretty impressive. I've gone through it. You'll start to see some of the actions and the products that Bret was talking about today. So Bret Ingerman, thank you so much for joining us with the Connected Campus.
Thanks, Jeff. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Connected Campus. Please leave a 5-star review for the show and share it so others can discover us. Make sure to also subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Connected Campus.